Have you ever curled up to your favorite book before going to bed, but you just started to feel a little bit too tired to continue reading? Well, we got to figure out something to do with the book. We're not going to dog ear the pages, and we're definitely not going to use one of those bookmarks. But what we are going to use is this book rest. And I'm going to show you how I built it in this video. Now, there's a few ways that you can actually read a book. And the first way is being the traditional way of actually holding the book in your hand, turning the pages, and using your imagination. The second way to read the book is similar to the first, but you don't need a book to do it. You can have multiple books, and that's the digital way. Things like Kindles or tablets or any type of reading software that you can find allow you to put multiple books on one device. And the third way, which is my favorite way to consume reading, is audiobooks. And I love audiobooks because I think they're the closest thing to watching it on TV or in the movie theater. Something about hearing the voices just takes it to another level and allows my imagination to latch on to whatever concept the author is trying to get through to us. I think there might be something wrong with my imagination because when it comes to reading a book, I have a hard time picturing what's going on. And I know what you're saying. Drew, how could that be? And I'd agree with you. Doesn't make any sense. But I know that I've always had issues where I had to read things over and over again to make sure that I absorbed it. I'd always get there because I put in the time and effort, but it took me a little bit longer to get there. But I do understand the folks who enjoy holding a book in their hand. My father is a traditionalist where he has to have his newspaper every morning. He wants to read it cover to cover. He enjoys that feeling in his hand, and he gets the most fulfillment or enjoyment out of that. That's just not me. But I was commissioned to make this book rest for a person whose wife is a big reader, and they often like to read before they go to bed. So he found the picture on Pinterest and then sent it to me and asked, hey, can you tweak it and add a few things to it? And I thought this might be a cool project. So I went out to my local wood shop and I bought some lumber. I had intended to get something dark like walnut, but when I walked in the shop, I saw this mahogany. I had never worked with mahogany before, but this mahogany was beautiful. And some of the pictures I've seen of mahogany have shown that mahogany has this look about it where it looks like it's unfinished when it's finished, but it also looks finished when it's finished. And I know that doesn't make any sense, but you'll see it in these pictures when we get to the end. The design for this book rest started with a triangle, but there's a little tweak to it, and you'll see it a little bit later on what that tweak actually is. But the peak of it is a 30-degree triangle, which essentially makes the bottom cuts also 30 degrees. The only way I was able to accomplish this 30-degree angle was by utilizing my tenon jig on my table saw. But that's not enough for it to have a book rest and a book rest alone, so I decided to add a few more things to it. One of the things I decided to add was a place to put your pen or your pencil, but I also thought it would be cool to have a place to rest your teacup or your coffee mug. To route them out, I utilized my compact router, and to get it perfect, I used a scrap piece of wood that I used as a brace for my compact router, and I used that to route out the pen slot. Just some CA glue and activator was all I needed to get it nice and straight, and the great thing about this method is this tape comes right up, and there's very little to clean up afterwards. When it came to routing the coffee mug or the teacup spot, I bought a template off of Amazon, and I'll put a link down below so you guys can check it out. But it came at 3 different templates of different sizes for circles, and I found the one that fit most coffee mugs, and I used that one for this project. Now, I know I'm not reaching too far here by telling you guys that I know this is the best possible camera angle I could have gotten for you guys, and I'm not apologizing for doing my best work for you guys here. It took me so long to get this just right. I put it down, picked it up, put it down again, picked it up, until I got that brace piece just right. Now, if you guys have a better option for how I could have put this brace piece on, I would love to hear it in the comments below. But as you can see there, it worked out. Now this pen hold is holding the pen like it should. For the template that's going to make the slot for the teacup or the coffee mug, I went a different route. I use double-sided tape, and I'll put a link to the one I use below because this stuff is super strong. And those yellow pieces below are the backing that you take off before you stick it down. This stuff won't move, trust me. And it's important to know that when you do utilize something like this, you need to get all of the pieces. The hardest part about routing out something in a template like that is making sure that you get the entire bottom flush. I had to go across a couple times, but using the right router bit allowed me to get it perfectly flat. And as you just saw there, I used a special card scraper that's perfect for juice grooves, which also was the perfect thing to use for this pen slot. A little bit of CA glue in between the glue here allows me to enjoy some extra clamping pressure to help with this awkward glue up. But as you can see here, it didn't work. So on the next piece, I'm going to smarten up, and I used a couple offcuts to use as a means to grip. And it works out 10 times better. Don't cut corners when you're building things because this is what always happens. It doesn't work out and you have to do what you thought you were going to do in the first place, but you were avoiding doing it because you thought it would take too much time, only to use that time again to do the thing that you thought you were going to avoid. You probably already noticed from watching this, but if you turn the offcuts that you've already cut for this piece the opposite direction, it actually gives you the perfect holding power or the holding grip for what you're using. Just a little quick tip for when you're doing this in the future, because it took me a few times to figure out that it was just that easy. And again, don't cut corners because they'll catch up with you. Have you ever used a jig to create a jig by adding on to a jig? That's what I did here. I needed a spline jig to add some stability to my miters. The end grain to end grain connection was going to be okay with glue, but I wanted to make sure that it was better than okay. I know these books that are going to rest on here aren't going to be the heaviest, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure there was some stability so that this product wouldn't fail. This thing cuts perfectly. Some extra 2x4s I had laying around, another piece of plywood, and some triangle pieces was all I needed to add this jig to my existing 10-inch jig. And it comes apart very easily so that I can put it away and use it again next time. The splines I chose for this project was a hard maple spline, and this spline was just because of the accent color. I thought the mahogany with a light accent of maple was going to provide a very nice contrast to the project. When I get to the underside of this project, you'll see I'm going to add some plugs that allow it to have a little bit more stability from the underside. You'll never see them, but they're there just because only one side is going to be supporting the entire weight of these books. You want a snug fit for these splines, but not too snug. The glue is going to cause it to swell a little bit, and that's going to make up the difference. Once that was dry, I was able to just cut it off with my flush trim saw, and it may mar up the surface a little bit, but that's nothing that a little bit of sanding can take care of, which I did next. I had a few imperfections that I filled with some sawdust and glue. This is optional. I just wanted it to look a little bit perfect, and you'll never know that was there. Learning from prior mistakes, I decided it was probably smart for us to use the offcut again. And this is not foolproof, but it's definitely a little bit more stable than not using it. And I just used a little CA glue again with my green tape, and I put the offcuts right on there using the right angle. I've seen some people just put the offcuts directly onto the wood and knock it off, which I think would work, but I just didn't want to deal with it if it didn't work. So I chose the safe method. Cleaning up your glue now makes it so that there's less work for you to do later. It's times like this where I realize that I need to stop procrastinating building a proper workbench. It's just not good enough to use my table like this to clamp my workpiece when I could have a proper flat workbench to do it. And as I mentioned before, I was going to add a few dowels to the underside just to give it a little bit more holding power, which I don't think it needs, but overbuilding is something that I'm known for. So I used this offcut. I drilled a hole through it very straight so that I had a guide for my drill bit here. and then it's going to go right up. And this is very nerve-wracking because when the project is so close to the end, this is when you don't want to make a mistake. So once these holes are drilled, I just took a dowel, sanded off one piece of it, and then glued and put them in the holes. The thought process behind sanding off a little point on one side is I'm just giving a place for the glue to go when I put it in the hole. The last thing I want is for it to swell or be under pressure and not be able to go where it needs to go. But as you can see here, it is still a pretty tight fit, and it does take quite a few knocks to knock it in. I'm just sitting here tapping it home until I'm satisfied with where it is. And the sound changes when it hits the bottom of the hole, so you'll know. Now that that's all taken care of, the next thing you do is just to give it a quick sanding. I've already taken it through the grits, but I have a couple sharp edges here that I'd rather do without. I do like the look of having it fairly sharp, but I don't want it to be too sharp. Now, when you use Rubio Monocoat, they sell their pre-conditioner to get your wood or clean your wood just right, but it's really just mineral spirits. So I'm using mineral spirits, which gives you a peek of that color of the wood popping out, and it's also taking some of the extra sawdust out here. I measured up a couple batches of my Rubio Monocoat Pure here with a little bit of hardener, and then I just went to town massaging it into the wood. There's 1,000,001 different finishes you can use for your project, but I always come back to the Rubio Monocoat because of how simple it is. And I know it costs a little bit more than some of the other options, but the simplicity of it, I just can't get away from it. It goes on so easy using a little white Scotch-Brite. You massage it in to the wood, and then you just clean off everything. You leave nothing left on your wood, and then it's almost dry to the touch immediately.